It all started with a notification I almost dismissed. A muted chime on my work laptop at 2 a.m., long after Daniel and I had retired for the night. I was a structural engineer and Daniel was a financial analyst. Our lives were a neat, predictable grid of logic and numbers, the antithesis of late-night digital intrigue. But I was restless, the kind of professional restlessness that keeps a perfectionist awake, reviewing stress calculations in her mind. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the man who had been my anchor for 10 years, and padded into my home office. The notification wasn't an email. It was a file transfer alert, anonymous, completed just moments ago. My first thought was a hack, a virus, but the file was small and contained a single item. A highly encrypted, password-protected folder labeled Blueprint 2.0. I'm a woman who deals in foundations and load-bearing walls. A locked door is merely a puzzle to be solved. It took me 45 minutes, a few obscure programming forums, and a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt since college finals, but I cracked it. The password wasn't a complex code. It was a sequence of numbers Daniel used to mock for their simplicity. The address of his childhood home, followed by my birthday. A strange, intimate blend of the past and the present, and it sent a small, unsettling tremor through me. Inside, Blueprint 2.0, was a meticulously organized collection of documents, photos, and chat logs. It wasn't malware. It was a map. A detailed multi-year plan charting a life that directly contradicted the one Daniel and I had been building. The first document was a mission statement, dated 11 years ago, 6 months before I met Daniel at a mutual friend's wedding. It was a career strategy, not for his finance job, but for an asset acquisition project. The primary goal: to secure a financially stable, highly competent partner, a partner with specific attributes. The bullet points listed proven professional ambition, strong family ties, low risk of immediate dependency, and, chillingly, proficiency in architectural design and property management. That last point hit me like a physical blow. I specialized in residential architecture. Daniel didn't just fall for the woman he met at a wedding. He had targeted an architect. I scrolled through the associated files, my hands shaking so badly I had to rest my phone against the desk. There were financial models, intricate spreadsheets tracking our joint savings, my investment portfolio, even the projected value of our newly built house. The house I had designed, down to the last fixture, the house Daniel had called our masterpiece. But the real gut punch was the subfolder labeled the secondary structure. Contained photos. Photos of Daniel, smiling, holding hands with a woman I had never seen before. A beautiful, dark-haired woman, standing in front of a small, rustic cottage by a lake. They weren't old photos. The timestamp on the most recent one was from last month, taken during a business trip Daniel claimed was a crucial conference in Chicago. The accompanying files were the transcript of their life. A fully executed deed for the lake cottage, purchased 3 years ago. In his name, but with a note, to be transferred to upon completion of Phase 2. Medical records for a child, a little boy named Ethan, age 2. Daniel's son. Chat logs, thousands of messages, not flirtatious in the way of a casual affair, but deeply, boringly domestic. Discussions about Ethan's pediatrician, the leaking roof of the cottage, her application for a local teaching job. A complete parallel life, built with the stability and care he supposedly reserved for me. The betrayal was so clinical, so utterly devoid of passion, that it transcended mere infidelity. It was an intellectual offense, a decade-long campaign of deception where I wasn't his partner, but a high-value asset in his convoluted personal portfolio. I didn't wake him up. Couldn't. I needed silence to process the sheer scale of the lie. The man who kissed me goodbye every morning, who held me through my father's illness, who had helped me pick out the Italian tile for our bathroom. It was all a role he was playing. He hadn't just cheated. He had fabricated an entire identity. My mind, the mind of an engineer, immediately started to backtrack, searching for the structural flaws in his perfect design. His business trips were always conveniently scheduled around long weekends. His excessive focus on the financial details of our home build, which I had initially found endearing, was now clearly an exercise in asset evaluation. The way he sometimes looked at me, not with love, but with a strange, calculating satisfaction, like a chess player who had just executed a complex opening move. The most chilling revelation was in a document titled Exit Strategy, Phase 3. It was a timeline that mapped out, with terrifying precision, his planned divorce from me. Once our house had reached its peak value and my career had stabilized to a point where I could absorb the financial shock without a lawsuit that could complicate asset transfer. The timeline predicted a friendly separation within the next 6 to 8 months. 6 months. I had 6 months until my husband intended to discard me, not for love, not for lust, but because I had served my purpose in his blueprint. Closed the file. The sun was starting to peek over the horizon, painting the edge of my office window in a sickly shade of orange. Daniel would be waking up soon. The thought of watching him stretch, kiss me on the forehead, and ask about my day made me feel physically ill. I needed a plan. I wasn't just losing a husband. I was facing the demolition of my reality. But I was an architect, and if there was one thing I knew, it was how to identify a flawed foundation and, more importantly, how to build a contingency plan that would bring the whole defective structure down on the head of its creator. Daniel had given me the blueprint for his betrayal. Now I would design his downfall. The game was on, and he had no idea his carefully constructed walls were already crumbling from within. The sun was fully up now, mocking the desolate landscape of my soul with its bright, cheerful light. Daniel stirred in bed. I quickly closed the Blueprint 2.0 folder, deleted the cracked password from my memory, and shut down my laptop. The cold, metallic feel of the aluminum casing was the only thing grounding me. I crept back into the bedroom. Daniel was already sitting up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, a picture of innocent domesticity. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice husky, the same voice that had murmured promises of forever into my ear. "You're up early. New projects stressing you out." I walked to the closet, forcing my face into a mask of mild exhaustion. Something like that. A structural anomaly I couldn't ignore. The irony tasted like ash. I put on my best concerned professional look. I might need to take a quick, unscheduled site visit tomorrow. Out of state. Nothing big. Just a day trip to check the foundations on the Kingston project before the weather turns. He frowned slightly. Then his face smoothed into an expression of supportive concern. "Kingston. That's near Pennsylvania, right? Long drive. Be careful, Ilara." He got out of bed, coming over to wrap his arms around me. His touch, once comforting, now felt like a parasite. "Take the company sedan. And call me when you land the job." He's tracking the mileage, I thought, a cold calculation replacing the hurt. He needs to know my movements to ensure they don't interfere with the secondary structure's routine. I spent the rest of that day in a haze of feigned normalcy. I drafted a professional-looking itinerary for the fictional Kingston trip. I even booked a refundable flight to Philadelphia and back, just in case he checked my credit card activity. But my real destination was clear: the small lake town of Willow Creek, 3 hours north of the city, where Daniel's mistress, who the chat logs revealed was Amelia, and his son Ethan lived. The next morning I left before dawn. I took Daniel's company sedan, as he suggested, meticulously noting the starting mileage. I drove with the kind of focus I usually reserved for complex engineering problems. I wasn't Ilara, the heartbroken wife. I was Ilara, the investigator, and Amelia was a high-priority risk factor in Daniel's financial model. I needed to understand her threat level. Willow Creek was exactly the kind of sleepy, picturesque town Daniel had always claimed to despise. Too slow, too far from the action. The cottage address led me down a winding, unpaved road to a small, charming wooden house nestled among towering pines. The sight of it was visceral. It wasn't the sleek, modern mansion I had designed. It was cozy, real, and lived in. I parked my car a discreet distance away, pretending to be a lost hiker. I watched. The details were what broke me. Daniel's blueprint hadn't prepared me for the emotional weight of their mundane existence. At 9 a.m., Amelia stepped out. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the polished corporate way Daniel preferred. She was earthy, wearing a comfortable sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back. She looked happy. She bent down to pick up a small, brightly colored tricycle that had been left on the porch. The very same model of tricycle Daniel had scoffed at when my sister suggested we buy one for her nephew, calling it clutter. Then a little boy, Ethan, toddled out. He had Daniel's curly brown hair and the same mischievous tilt to his chin. I watched as Amelia scooped him up, kissing the top of his head. My breath hitched. I knew rationally that the child was real, but seeing his face, a mirror of the man who had slept beside me last night, turned the betrayal from a financial transaction into a crushing human tragedy. Daniel hadn't just loved someone else. He had created a family with her, a simpler, perhaps truer existence, while keeping me as his trophy wife and financial safety net. I spent the entire day gathering information with the chilling precision of a spy. I walked around the periphery of the property, taking photos of the house, noting the worn path leading to the lake, and even finding a small, engraved wooden plaque nailed to a tree. A&D Our Secret Sanctuary, 2022. The year was significant. It was the same year Daniel had persuaded me to take out a massive loan to start our independent design firm. Money that I now suspected had partially funded this very sanctuary. I visited the small general store nearby, posing as a realtor assessing the neighborhood. The woman behind the counter, a kindly soul with a keen interest in gossip, was happy to talk about the residents. Oh, Amelia, a lovely girl, teaches at the elementary school. And Daniel, her husband or fiancé, whatever they are. He's the quiet one. Comes up every other weekend like clockwork. Dedicated father, that one. Always buying the little one toys. Every other weekend. The exact schedule of his critical financial summits in other cities. The woman even mentioned a recurring delivery. A specific brand of gourmet coffee Daniel insisted on bringing. It was the same obscure high-end Ethiopian blend he insisted I buy him every week. He was living the exact same meticulous life in two different places, even down to his coffee rituals. The ultimate find was at a local construction site near the cottage. I spotted a familiar logo on a delivery truck. Curiosity and my professional license led me to the site manager. I introduced myself as a consultant. See that new dock being built on the lake? The expensive, custom cedar one? The manager asked. The client, Daniel, great guy. He insisted on working with me personally on the schematics. Said he wanted it perfect for his son to fish off of. Schematics. Daniel, the financial analyst, working on schematics. I pulled out my phone and showed the manager a picture of Daniel. That him. That's the guy. A real stickler for detail, but he paid top dollar. Funny thing is, he had me draw up two sets of designs. One for him and one for a separate consultant, who was apparently overseeing the aesthetic quality of the build. Said she was an architect who did work for his main firm. The manager pulled up the consulting email. It was an encrypted burner account, but the professional critique attached to the design was written in a style I knew better than my own handwriting. It was a precise, technical review of load-bearing stresses and cedar quality. It was my professional assessment, stripped from an old project file and pasted into an anonymous consultation. He hadn't just used my design skills to build our life. He had subtly leveraged my expertise to ensure his secret life was structurally sound and aesthetically pleasing. I wasn't just his wife and business partner. I was his unpaid, anonymous architectural consultant for his other woman's home. I drove back, the company sedan's wheels eating up the miles, the sun setting behind me. The anger had solidified into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Daniel's blueprint was flawed because he hadn't accounted for one factor. My ability to fight back, not with emotion, but with the ruthless logic of an engineer facing catastrophic structural failure. He had given me all the tools. Now I would use them to redesign his future. He wanted an exit strategy. I would give him an eviction. returning to the perfection of our home. The home I built, the design he was planning to monetize and discard, was like stepping onto a stage mid-performance. I was no longer Ilara, the loving wife. I was an actress playing the role, a detective living undercover in her own life, and Daniel was my unsuspecting audience. The moment I walked through the door, Daniel was there, ready with his rehearsed empathy. "Tired, sweetie. How was Kingston? Any major issues with the pilings?" I handed him my company key card, knowing he would check the mileage immediately. Kingston was fine. Just a few minor adjustments to the foundation drawings. Needed to confirm the bedrock composition in person. I kept my answer vague, professional, and slightly dull. The more boring the truth I presented, the less likely he was to pry. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. You worry too much. I'll take care of the car tomorrow." He kissed me, a light, possessive peck on the forehead. I flinched internally, feeling the ghost of Amelia's hair on his shoulder, the phantom scent of the lake cottage on his skin. I forced a smile. "Just a professional instinct, darling. You know me." The next few weeks were a psychological tightrope walk. Every dinner was a theatrical production. When he talked about his long hours at the office, I would listen intently, occasionally offering a strategic comment about the financial markets to reinforce my role as his competent partner. "I'm considering a major shift in our portfolio, Ilara," he said one evening over the Italian tile countertop, the tile I had personally sourced from a small artisan near Florence. "Moving more aggressively into real estate investment trusts. They'll peak perfectly within the next 6 to 8 months. He was testing the waters for his Phase 3 exit. The confidence in his voice was sickening. He believed he was laying the groundwork for us, while I knew he was preparing to sever me from the equation. "REITs are sound, Daniel, especially with property values stabilizing," I replied, tracing a line on the marble. "But you know I always preferred tangible assets. Our house, for example. I'm thinking of officially registering the design rights under my name next week. It's a formality, but it secures my intellectual property, should we ever decide to license the plans." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. It was a subtle, involuntary twitch, but I saw it. The blueprint mentioned the house's value as a primary asset. Registering the design under my name would complicate his liquidation plan. It was the first skirmish in our secret war. "A formality. Sounds a bit protective, doesn't it?" he asked, a hint of unease in his tone. I laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't reach my eyes. "Protective? Course, darling. It's my masterpiece. Besides, if we ever needed to sell, a registered design adds exclusivity. Think of the premium we could charge." I used his own language, profit and premium, to make my defensive move sound like a shared financial advantage. He relaxed, nodding slowly. "You always think of the angles, Ilara. That's why you're the best. And that's why I'll beat you," I thought, stirring my wine. I began making my moves outside the house with the same cold, calculating precision. I revisited Blueprint 2.0 every night, cross-referencing his digital trail with my physical evidence. I learned that he had been systematically diverting small sums from our joint emergency savings account, not enough to trigger an alert, but enough over 3 years to finance the majority of the cottage's upgrades and Ethan's private childcare. My professional life became my sanctuary and my weapon. I started deliberately overscheduling myself, inventing evening meetings and weekend site inspections, precisely during the times he was scheduled to be with Amelia. This served 2 purposes. 1, it gave me a solid professional alibi for my own countermoves, and 2, it masked my emotional withdrawal, making it look like dedication to my career, which Daniel admired as an asset attribute. During one of my late nights at the office, I met with a discreet forensic accountant and a family lawyer, not to initiate divorce proceedings, but for consultation. I presented my case not as a betrayed wife, but as a CEO facing corporate fraud. I showed them the Blueprint 2.0 as evidence of premeditated financial conspiracy. "This is extraordinary, Ms. Hayes." The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Kincaid, commented, tapping the detailed timeline. Most clients discover the affair. You've uncovered a decade-long financial acquisition strategy. This changes everything. We can argue fraud and emotional distress, not just typical divorce. I explained my strategy. Daniel's phase 3 is 6 months away. I need to complete my own counter blueprint before he makes his move. I need to make sure that when I tell him I know, he is already financially paralyzed. The lawyer outlined the critical steps: securing my proprietary designs, freezing a hidden investment account Daniel had been feeding, and most importantly, gathering irrefutable proof of his child, the most expensive non-liquid asset in his secondary structure. The deeper I dug into his finances, the more layers of his deceit I peeled back. I discovered that Daniel wasn't just using our joint funds. He had taken out a second silent mortgage on our house, leveraging its value against the small-town equity of the cottage. The paperwork, cleverly buried in a shell corporation, showed he intended to pay off the second mortgage after the sale of our primary residence. It was a classic leveraging scheme where I was the collateral. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable, yet invisible. One evening, Daniel's mother called, gushing about his dedication. "He's been so stressed with work, Ilara. Thank goodness he has you, his rock." He was talking about how he needs to solidify his future plans soon. I smiled into the phone. "I know, Mrs. Hayes. He's working on a big project. But I'm fine. I'm building my own foundations too." That night, lying next to the man who was meticulously dismantling my life, I felt a detached, chilling control. I had his blueprint. He had no idea I was rewriting it. He thought he was playing chess, but he had mistakenly handed his opponent the entire playbook. My move was coming, and it wouldn't be a gentle check. It would be a sudden, devastating structural collapse. The Kingston project became my shield. I was constantly out of town or working late, using the time to execute my own complex engineering feat, the complete dismantling of Daniel's financial fortress. My goal wasn't just to leave him. It was to leave him with the ruins of his perfect life plan, while ensuring my own foundations remained unshakable. My first major move involved the house. I contacted the licensing board and not only secured the full intellectual property rights to the design, but also subtly changed the home's zoning designation. Our neighborhood was slowly transitioning to mixed use. I had the house, and specifically the garage space, rezoned for commercial architecture offices, citing the increasing need for independent design firms in the area. This drastically increased the property's value on paper, but more importantly, it introduced a restrictive clause. Any sale of the property to a purely residential buyer would be subject to a massive municipal penalty fee unless the new owner committed to maintaining the commercial zoning for at least 5 years. I knew Daniel's target buyer in his exit strategy was a wealthy family who wanted a trophy home. They wouldn't touch a property with complex commercial zoning and an immediate demolition fee. I had effectively made the house a toxic asset for his intended market, drastically complicating his planned liquidation. The second move was the quiet neutralization of his silent mortgage. Daniel's financial modeling was impeccable, but his arrogance was his weakness. He used a small, obscure local bank in Willow Creek for the cottage mortgage and a national firm for the second mortgage on our house. He assumed I wouldn't look at the small-town bank. I did. I opened an account there, citing consulting work in the area. Once established, I anonymously submitted a formal request for a federal audit review on the grounds of potential predatory lending practices involving cross-state leveraging. I didn't accuse Daniel, I accused the bank. The resulting freeze on the mortgage and loan portfolios, a temporary routine measure during an audit, was all I needed. He wouldn't be able to touch the equity in either property without a full legal review that would expose his entire shell game. I secured irrefutable proof of his family. Disguised in a generic, oversized hat and sunglasses, I paid a visit to Amelia's elementary school. I pretended to be a newly hired substitute teacher, making small talk in the office. I learned Ethan's birthday, Daniel's emergency contact information, listed under an alias at his work number, and even managed to discreetly photograph the school registration form. Proof that Daniel, under a fabricated name, was listed as the father and legally responsible party. This was the human asset I needed to secure against him. The emotional toll of this double life was nearly crushing. Daniel, sensing a shift in the financial winds, likely due to the mortgage freeze he couldn't explain, became more attentive, more loving. He bought me expensive jewelry, whispering about how much he valued our partnership. He was trying to cement my loyalty just as he was preparing his final betrayal. One Friday, he announced he was canceling his Chicago conference. My flight was delayed, then cancelled. A sign, I think. Let's spend the weekend here. Just us. We never do that anymore. I knew this was a deflection. He was scrambling because his plans were hitting snags. He couldn't go to the cottage because the bank freeze complicated his cover story with Amelia. I had him cornered. I played the role of the delighted wife perfectly. That's wonderful, darling. I'll cook your favorite meal. While he was showering, I executed the final phase of the counter blueprint. I logged into our joint investment platform, where Daniel kept the bulk of his liquid funds, money he had earmarked for his new life with Amelia. I was listed as a co-signer on the account. I had already confirmed with my lawyer that as long as I acted before the divorce was filed, my actions were within the boundaries of a fiduciary partner protecting joint assets. I didn't steal the money. I transferred it. I liquidated all his high-risk tech stocks and moved 90% of the cash into a self-directed retirement account, Styra, under my name, designating him as the secondary beneficiary only after my death, a legal move that locked the funds from immediate pre-divorce access. I transferred the remaining 10% into a high-interest, ultra-conservative government bond fund that matured in 10 years. I left him a message in the notes section of the transaction, a cryptic note only he would understand. Structural integrity assessment, negative. Funds secured. When he came downstairs, smelling of his expensive cologne, I was setting the table. "Something smells amazing," he said, coming up to kiss my neck. "It's just the final course, darling," I replied, a calm, chilling smile on my face. Everything is ready. The game was over. I had identified the flaw, neutralized his assets, protected my own, and most importantly, I had forced the confrontation onto my terms, on my timeline. Now it was time for the final performance. The atmosphere at the dinner table was deceptively tranquil. Daniel was expansive, praising the meal, discussing his stressful week, and talking vaguely about a fishing trip he wanted to take next year. A clear, clumsy attempt to merge his two worlds by bringing the lake cottage into our conversation. I waited until we were settled in the living room, a space I had meticulously designed for comfort, but which now felt like a courtroom. Daniel was relaxing, scrolling through his phone, likely checking his portfolio and, more likely, messaging Amelia. I cleared my throat, picking up my phone and opening a file. It wasn't Blueprint 2.0. It was a pristine one-page document I had titled Structural Deficiency Report. "Daniel," I began, my voice steady, professional, utterly devoid of emotion. "I need to talk to you about a major flaw in our foundation." He didn't look up immediately. "Can it wait, Ilara? You know I hate work talk after dinner. Just tell me you filed the paperwork for the zoning change. That's a huge value add. It's about more than zoning. It's about your asset acquisition project. And Blueprint 2.0. His fingers froze on the screen. The smile vanished. He slowly lowered his phone, his eyes meeting mine. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw panic, raw and ugly, flicker behind the facade of the financial analyst. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his usual smooth delivery cracking. "Is this a new design code?" I smiled, a cold, empty gesture. "It's the file you anonymously transferred to my laptop. The one detailing your 10-year plan to acquire a financially stable partner with architectural skills, liquidate our shared assets, and transition to your secondary structure with Amelia and Ethan in 6 to 8 months. The color drained from his face. He looked genuinely sick. "You You hacked my file. Lara, that's private. That's premeditated fraud and emotional distress. Yes, I know the legal terms, Daniel. I consulted with Ms. Kincaid. She found your asset acquisition document to be a compelling piece of evidence. Almost as compelling as the photos of your son, Ethan, and the deed to the Willow Creek cottage. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I spoke as if reviewing a flawed tender document. This quiet, intellectual approach was far more terrifying to him than any emotional outburst. He finally found his footing, reverting to the manipulator. Ilara, wait. It's a mistake. Fantasy. I was under stress. I was planning a book. A fictional outline. You can't take this seriously. We can fix this. It's just a woman, a lapse. It's not a lapse, Daniel. It's a 2-year-old child and a 3-year-old mortgage. And it's not just a woman. It's a parallel life you built using my design expertise. Did you truly believe I wouldn't recognize my own technical assessment in the schematics for Amelia's dock? You didn't cheat on me. You committed identity theft to shore up your new life. I pulled up the structural deficiency report on my phone, turning the screen to face him. This is my blueprint. It outlines your current financial position. He leaned in, his eyes darting across the document. I watched his brain, the financial analyst's brain, work in real time as he absorbed the data. The house. Zoning adjusted to mixed-use commercial. Sale to residential buyer triggers $150,000 municipal penalty. Liquidity value severely compromised for 5 years. The mortgages. Both accounts currently frozen pending federal audit review regarding predatory cross-state leveraging practices. Cannot access equity or close the loan. The investments. High-risk liquid assets transferred to locked Styra under my name. 90% unreachable pre-divorce. 10% secured in long-term government bonds. Funds secured. He stared at the page, then up at me. His face a mask of dawning horror. The Styra. Ilara, you gutted the portfolio. You can't do that. That was my capital. It was our joint capital, Daniel. And I secured it. I merely exercised my right as a fiduciary partner to protect our joint assets from what is clearly a pattern of high-risk, unauthorized financial conspiracy. I used his words, his corporate jargon, to describe his downfall. Your exit strategy is invalid. The asset is non-liquid, the liabilities are locked, and your future capital is secured. The air filled with a terrifying silence. Then Daniel's mask completely shattered. He lunged to his feet, knocking over the small side table. You manipulative bitch. You planned this. You were playing me. His voice was a guttural snarl, all the charm stripped away. You taught me well, Daniel, I said, rising to face him, perfectly composed. You built a decade-long lie, and I dismantled it in 3 weeks. You designed the perfect trap, and you walked into my counter-design. That is the fundamental difference between us. You focused on the facade, and I focused on the foundations. What about Amelia? What about my son? He pleaded, desperation replacing anger. That, I said, walking towards the front door, already grabbing my pre-packed single suitcase, is your secondary structure. Your problem, not mine. You chose to build a life on a flimsy, fraudulent foundation. That structure is yours to maintain, with no access to the capital you plan to use. I stopped at the doorway. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow. My divorce filing will cite financial fraud and premeditated emotional distress, using your own Blueprint 2.0 as proof of intent. You will be paying child support, Daniel. You will be paying alimony. And you will be doing it with the meager salary you have left, because the house, my masterpiece, will be sold only when I decide it's financially viable. I stepped out onto the porch, turning back one last time. He was standing amidst the wreckage of the spilled wine and the overturned table, the perfect architect of his own ruin. Oh, and Daniel, I added, my voice softening just enough to deliver the final blow. I kept the company sedan. After all, I still have a few more site visits to conduct. I walked away from the house I built, not with regret, but with the quiet satisfaction of a structural engineer who had just prevented a catastrophic collapse. My name was Ilara, and I specialized in enduring foundations. Daniel had learned the hard way that you never hand your enemy the blueprint to your future, especially when that enemy is the one who drew up the plans for your entire life. I was free. And his perfect, calculated life was now a condemned building.